For days, a massive dog sat silently outside a woman's home, refusing food, water, or shelter. Neighbors whispered, calling it strange, even dangerous. But when the woman finally gathered the courage to open her door, the truth behind the dog's vigil stunned everyone and revealed a story no one expected. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning had started like any other. Margaret stepped onto her porch, coffee in hand, when she froze. At the edge of her lawn sat a massive dog, his white coat gleaming against the green grass. He didn't move, didn't bark, just stared, calm yet unyielding, as though waiting. Margaret's first reaction was fear. She had never seen the animal before, and his size alone was intimidating. But what unsettled her more was his stillness. Hours passed, yet he remained in the same spot, eyes fixed on her doorway, as if silently demanding something she couldn't yet understand. By the afternoon, Margaret expected the dog to wander off, but he didn't. Rain clouds gathered, the temperature dropped, yet he stayed rooted in the same spot, silent, patient, immovable. She placed a bowl of water on the porch, sliding it across the steps, but he ignored it. She even left scraps of food, yet his eyes never wavered from the door. The following morning, he was still there. Neighbors began to notice, whispering. As they passed, "Why doesn't he leave?" one murmured. Another shook their head. "Maybe he's dangerous. Maybe he's waiting for something." Margaret's unease grew. She considered calling animal control, but something stopped her. This wasn't the behavior of a stray scavenging for scraps. There was a purpose in his posture, a determination in his gaze. He wasn't just waiting outside her house. He was waiting for her. That night, Margaret double-checked the locks on her doors, convinced the dog might break in. Yet when she peeked through the curtain, he hadn't moved. He lay curled on the grass, head resting on his paws, his gaze never leaving her doorway. It was unsettling and strangely heartbreaking. The next morning, she found herself watching him longer. There was no aggression in his eyes, only a deep sadness that stirred something inside her. Why here? Why her house? She whispered questions he couldn't answer, yet his steady presence felt like a silent reply. By the third day, Margaret's fear had dulled into wonder. Instead of avoiding the window, she kept glancing through it, searching for him. She began to feel less like he was intruding and more like he was guarding. Still, one question gnawed at her relentlessly. Who, or what, was he waiting for? On the fourth morning, Margaret noticed something unusual. The dog wasn't just sitting idly. He behaved as though he had a mission. At times, he'd rise and pace near her front steps, pausing to scratch lightly at the door, then retreat to his spot in the yard as if guarding it. At night, when the neighborhood fell silent, his posture changed. He sat upright, ears alert, eyes scanning the street like a sentry. Not once did he wander away, even when other dogs barked in the distance. He looked trained, disciplined, almost purposeful. Margaret couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't an ordinary stray. His loyalty seemed directed not at a place, but at someone or something inside her home. Each time she stepped out, his eyes lit up briefly, only to cloud again, with waiting sorrow. Whatever his story was, it was tied to her doorstep. By the end of the week, the dog had become the neighborhood's mystery. Children pointed at him on their way to school, while adults whispered theories over morning walks. Some insisted he was dangerous, that a dog so large and unyielding had to be unpredictable. Others felt pity, noting his patience and silent devotion. Margaret's phone rang more than once, neighbors urging her to call animal control. "You can't let that beast sit there forever," one warned. But every time she picked up the number, her hand froze. Something about his eyes made her hesitate. She noticed how he ignored everyone else, never moving when strangers approached, yet always perking up when she stepped outside. The bond, though unspoken, was undeniable. The gossip and warnings grew louder, but Margaret's instincts whispered something different. Deep down, she felt the dog wasn't a threat at all. He was waiting for her. That evening, the skies darkened and a storm rolled in. Rain pelted the streets, lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the windows. Margaret pulled her curtains shut, telling herself the dog would find shelter. But when she peeked again, Her heart sank. He was still there, soaked to the bone. He refused to move from her doorstep. Water streamed from his fur, his body shivering violently, yet his eyes stayed fixed on her door. Every crack of thunder made him flinch, but he didn't run. Margaret's chest tightened. She wrapped a blanket around herself, pacing the room. This wasn't just stubbornness. It was loyalty, desperation, maybe even love. She could no longer watch him suffer. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Neighbors might call her foolish, but at that moment, compassion won. Margaret took a breath and finally opened the door. The hinges creaked as Margaret slowly pushed the door open, bracing herself for the worst. The dog stood motionless in the rain, water dripping from his muzzle, eyes locked on hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with surprising gentleness, he stepped forward. Margaret's pulse raced. She expected a lunge, a bark, anything aggressive, but instead, the dog lowered his head, sniffed the threshold, and patted inside as if he'd done it countless times before. He didn't roam wildly or search for food. He walked with purpose, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor, heading straight down the hall. Margaret followed, heart pounding. To her astonishment, he stopped in front of a small table by the stairs. On it rested a framed photograph of her late husband. The dog sat, water pooling beneath him, eyes fixed on the picture with a whimper so soft it broke her heart. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This wasn't a coincidence. The dog wasn't a stranger to this house. He knew it. And somehow, he knew her husband. Margaret sank into a chair, her mind racing. She picked up the photograph, a younger version of her husband smiling proudly, one arm wrapped around a familiar-looking puppy. Her breath caught. The same markings, the same amber eyes. The dog dripping on her floor wasn't a stranger at all. He was the grown version of the puppy her husband once rescued during his deployments abroad. Tears blurred her vision. Her husband had spoken fondly of that dog, but after his passing, Margaret assumed the animal had been rehomed, maybe even lost. Yet here he was, returning to the very place where his master had lived, waiting with unwavering patience. The realization spread like fire through her chest. He hadn't been guarding her house. He'd been waiting for him. And when the door opened, he found the closest piece of his master left, her. Margaret knelt, reaching out. The dog pressed his massive head into her lap, releasing a long, shuddering sigh. For days, he had endured hunger, cold, and loneliness. But at last, he was home. From that night on, the house felt different. The once empty halls echoed with the gentle patting of paws, and Margaret found herself smiling at the soft rhythm. The dog, no longer drenched and trembling, stretched out on a rug near the fireplace, finally eating the food she offered and sleeping deeply for the first time in days. Margaret often caught herself watching him, overwhelmed by the quiet devotion in his eyes. She whispered her husband's name once, and the dog's ears perked, his tail thumping softly against the floor. It was as if he understood, recognizing the bond that tied them all together. Neighbors who once warned her now looked on in awe. What they had seen as a threat was truly a guardian, carrying forward the loyalty he once gave her husband. And now, with every glance and gentle nuzzle, he gave it to her.